Welcome to Solved, the political discussion show for people with attention spans and those looking to develop one. My name is Jay, and our other resident solvers are Amanda, Deon, and Erin, who will offer a greeting now.
Hey there.
Hello.
How's it going?
Collectively, we produce the venerable, indispensable, not to mention award-winning podcast, Best of the Left, where humans, that's us, curate progressive media on a chosen topic, creating episodes that are greater than the sum of their parts. On this show, we use those same curation skills to put together stories and ideas that help us solve some of society's biggest problems, because if we don't tell you how to think, someone dumber on the internet will. Today, we're explaining the pillars of support that hold up tyrannical regimes and how to undermine the regime by forcing those pillars to collapse. Here's a quick overview we got from Tim Hersted's article on Substack. The article is called Why Nonviolent Resistance Doesn't Require Your Opponent to Have a Conscience. Phew. And with the subheadline, if nonviolence required tyrants to grow a heart, we'd be finished. Violence is what they're begging for. History shows we beat them by withdrawing pillars of support until they're forced to concede. And then deep in the article, it highlights what Trump needs and why he is vulnerable to those needs. So Trump needs economic stability, which is vulnerable to strikes and boycotts. Trump needs institutional cooperation, which is vulnerable to defection and noncompliance. Trump needs bureaucratic implementation, which is vulnerable to slowdowns and resistance, particularly through courts. Trump needs international legitimacy, which is vulnerable to sanctions and isolation. Trump needs police and military loyalty, vulnerable to refusals and defections. Trump needs business elite support, vulnerable to economic pressure. Trump needs religious legitimacy, vulnerable to moral condemnation from faith communities. And Trump needs narrative control, vulnerable to independent media documenting repression. And that pretty much covers it. So that's our show. Thanks for listening. That is everything you need to know. But we have some time left over. So we'll go into some of these in detail, starting with the Nation article, Think There's Nothing You Can Do to Stop ICE, Think Again. And this first one is all about education, what you can do. And it turns out having rights is a really important thing in a repressive society, and exercising those rights really makes the regime angry. So it starts, this article, it says, quote, during an interview on CNN last week, Tom Homan, Donald Trump's so-called border czar, made a big admission. Apparently, the residents of Chicago are making it too damn hard for ICE to enact Trump's mass deportation plan, saying, quote, Chicago, very well educated, Homan whined, the article says, continuing. They've been educated how to defy ICE, on how to hide from ICE. They call it know your rights. I call it how to escape from ICE. End quote.
Oh,
and Homan's comments do more than unintentionally boost my city's local pride. They also implicitly acknowledge both the power of collective resistance and the fact that one of the most potent weapons we have in our campaign against Trump's deportation campaign is a basic knowledge of our fundamental rights. So that's where we're starting today.
It's great that we don't have to rely on them having a heart. It's also great that, generally speaking, they're not very bright. If you listen to them talk, Homan specifically, like he can't be intelligent the way he sounds, but like they regularly are accidentally admitting things that they don't really want to admit. Like, just listen to them talk and you can find out exactly where they're vulnerable, exactly where you can attack, because they just tell you.
Yeah, when you have a head that's a, honey baked ham, there's not a lot of room for brain activity.
A honey baked ham. That's a new Trump insult, I think.
No, it's a Homan insult.
Oh, Homan insult. Okay.
I think I need to appreciate that just a little. Like, Amanda, you're not normally one that throws out those kind of low blows.
He's an evil man.
I love it. I love to see that level of petty. I like what we're going to discuss and how to go into it, because I feel like this is one of the things I felt some of the other resistance was missing, which was so many prongs of where you can be effective, where you could be utilized. I feel like more people's skills are kind of being called to the front. So I love that level of organizing. It just feels more effective when you're not relying on one methodology.
Yeah.
Yeah. This whole show is going to be like your guide to where can I get plugged in? I felt helpless 5 minutes ago, and you're about to be piled upon with opportunities and options that you will then figure out what fits me, my time, my skills, etc.
And naturally, like feeling overwhelmed and getting that sense of paralysis, I think that's natural. And you can sit in that for a minute, but it is the time. It is the time to call up, to participate, to get plugged in. So this is, as all of our soft conversations are, very well timed.
Mm-hmm. And I just want to say right off the top, because I know there's been a lot of conversation about this, there are definitely people who feel we should be escalating to a kind of scary degree. And all I would say is try everything else first. That's what I would say.
Yeah.
Because what you're aiming for is not going to be good. I hope it's not necessary. It's certainly not going to be good. So why don't we just try everything else first? All the nonviolent community organizing, pillar crumbling stuff. Let's just give that a try. How about that?
Agreed.
Yeah, that's the best point, I think, because I've seen a lot already, talking about specifically what's going on in Minnesota. A lot of people talking about, it's not working.
It's working.
This expectation that this will end tomorrow has to stop. This didn't start yesterday. It won't end tomorrow. This is a long-term fight. It's a fight now, and it's a long-term fight. There will be a lot of losses, but what people in Minnesota are doing is a model.
Yeah,
It's
absolutely.
constant.
They're showing us the way.
And it's not something that sprung up out of nowhere. They've been doing this for a few years now.
I would just clarify, it's not the model, it's a model.
Yeah.
And there are lots of other ideas that we're going to get into today. That like, maybe your place isn't on the street facing off against ICE. Your place might be somewhere else in a different section of the movement that's like targeting the corporations that are vendors for ICE. And those can be incredibly effective in terms of reducing ICE's ability to function. And you may never see them, but you're focusing on a different pillar. So that's what we're getting into today, all the different pillars. And we're starting at the most personal level and working our way up. So as I started with this article, education, knowing your rights, hugely, hugely beneficial. So the article continues on sort of how to be ready. It says, quote, preparation is key. Resistance begins long before ICE agents arrive. Legal organizations and advocacy groups must aggressively promote know your rights education opportunities and ensure that cost-free resources are accessible in multiple languages. Communities can organize defense teams to monitor ICE activity and provide immediate support. Churches, libraries, and other trusted spaces can reaffirm their role as sanctuaries, both symbolically and materially. Hospitality industry workers can ensure that our workplaces provide spaces for safety and solidarity for undocumented colleagues by collectively reviewing strategies for response if and when ICE shows up, end quote. And so wherever you are, whatever capacity you may have to engage in this, there will be organizations, either national or local, that can help get this sort of information out, have, printouts that are available. So either plug into something that exists or find something where you can be the conduit to get this sort of information to where it needs to be.
Yeah. Maybe you can't find a place or a way within your job to do something, but that means you need to focus elsewhere, right? So if you're in a position where your job actually allows you to do something unique and protect someone or help the movement, great. If not, like there are other places to plug in. So I just want to make sure people don't feel like, well, I'm not in the hospitality industry, so forget it. Or I'm not in a union, so forget it. No, that just means there's something else for you.
I wish I could remember his name, but I just read about a guy who is shipping whistles to Minnesota. And there's no chance he thought 6-7 weeks ago, I'm going to be a part of helping people with protest by my whistle company. but that's
Right.
what he's doing now. So there's
That's
always
awesome.
these weird little avenues that you specifically would fit into.
Yeah, exactly. And the articles that we're reading from today are so jam-packed with information that
Yeah.
I would really encourage you to go through our show notes in a way that you might not usually, because there are really specific, like you say, you are in a restaurant or hospitality industry. There are details here we're going to skip past about knowing your rights, about what you do and don't have to say when ICE shows up, when you can demand that they have a warrant versus when, like, okay, they really are allowed to be in a public place but not a private space. So again, these articles are full of details and you should definitely check them out if they are relevant to you. But this article sort of concludes this way, quote, collective efforts to stop arrests and deportation of our immigrant neighbors do more than protect targeted individuals. They build enduring community power and give neighbors and coworkers reason to have confidence in one another. Every neighborhood defense team and mutual aid network strengthens the fabric of solidarity, fostering cultures of care that extend beyond moments of crisis. By circumventing deportations, communities weaken the broader politics of fear and division that fuel these policies. End quote. So again, as we've been saying, like almost no matter what you do, you can find a community to plug into that you can be a part of. And, ideally, all of these organizations working on different aspects will end up being interconnected. And that is where the sort of universal solidarity comes in.
Yeah. And mutual aid groups in particular. I mean, in Minnesota, those are the groups that are bringing groceries to people who are afraid to leave their homes. Like they can connect you with how to help if you really don't know how.
I was gonna say that actually is my favorite thing that I've gotten plugged into is how you can provide mutual aid, specifically meals and groceries and necessities for people who are afraid to leave their homes. Because I mean, that's the reality. Yes, there's a lot of violence, there's a lot of fascism, resistance that needs to happen, but there are people that are being impacted day to day. And to truly serve the community, it feels like that's one of my go-tos that makes me feel better, makes me feel very connected to my neighbors specifically.
Yeah, naturally builds community.
Yeah. And I think what that highlights is there's going to be sort of more defensive and survival strategies and more offensive and actually attacking the pillars of support for the regime. And all of them are legitimate,
Yeah.
right? Like we need to defend and we need to survive. And we also need to confront. So, like, whatever role you end up playing, it helps.
Well, and sometimes I think people go to marches or they'll go to demonstrations and they walk away feeling like, what's the actual impact? What
Yeah.
did I do? How did I contribute? It felt nice to be in community with others, but I'm not feeling the results of this action. Whereas when you're bringing someone groceries, like it doesn't take much to see the impact. Providing dinner for a family, it just doesn't take much. So yeah, do both. Be on the
Yeah, do
offense
both.
and defensive. Like do what you can.
Yeah.
Anything is better than nothing, right? But I feel like taking both approaches, finding something in both categories, as Jay pointed out, it really makes you feel plugged in. It makes you feel connected.
So this next article is a very specific case study on a success the movement has already had, because there was a really widespread targeted campaign against a private airline that had a contract with ICE to do deportation flights. The airline was called Avelo, and they have ended their contract with ICE due to the campaign against them. And I feel like the sort of progressive perspective on campaigns against corporations is that might feel hollow. The corporation isn't profiting off of it anymore, but someone else will take their place and the deportations are still going to go on. But really, it is more important than that. And it is not just symbolic. It really does make a difference. So listen to this. It says, quote, the campaign targeting Avelo was more than just a boycott. Organizers targeted an ICE-enabling contractor with a public-facing brand, financial fragility, and political dependencies. This was not a symbolic protest. It was leverage. It sent a definitive signal to other commercial airlines. to keep distance from ICE deportations and opened space for pressure on other ICE enablers, end quote. And this article, like many of these articles today, makes the connection to the pillars of support and argues that you don't take out a pillar of support with one blow. You chip away at it, and you're not going to take them all out. You may never take all of them out, but you don't need to take all of them out. And getting an airline to stop their contract with ICE is a huge chip in that pillar because the meaningfulness of it goes beyond that one company. It sends a signal, like not just a market signal, but like a real signal to other corporations. Do we want to risk our brand image? Do we want to risk our customer base by having a contract with ICE? And a lot of them are going to be too afraid to do that. And they'll say no. So contracts with ICE will not happen, and we'll never hear about it. But those are also wins that flow from this campaign.
Absolutely. This is huge. I had heard about this campaign for a while, but actually hadn't heard that they they got them to end the contract. For a small airline, that contract is huge. That's a big deal. And that's part of the targeted approach here. Like, they chose this airline because they recognize they're smaller. Their business is fragile because of that. And also because this company was trying to emphasize through their brand that they're kind of the hometown airline. Like, they really wanted to connect with the community and places where they were based in. So all of that made them the perfect target to go after and say, oh yeah, are you the hometown good for the community airline? Well, apparently not, because you're helping the Gestapo. So all of that just made it perfect. And I'm thrilled that they succeeded this way. And yes, sending huge signals to everyone else.
There's a reason that some Republican states, I'm thinking specifically of Texas, have outlawed BDS, boycott, divest, and sanction movements against Israel, because that shit works. If you start hitting people in their wallets and making companies say, oh, I can't be a part of this anymore, that moves the needle. And if you start with the most vulnerable companies to that kind of attack, it can start to be like a domino effect, because it also creates a permission structure to say, oh, okay, well, now we're not doing that. We're, as a group, we're not doing that. Before it was like, got to take the money. But now, okay, obviously, it makes more sense to not take the money. And the more companies you can get to see that, the more it makes it difficult for the companies that do want the money to just go ahead and do it without feeling some sort of backlash from it.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I actually just did a commentary on Best of Left, the award-winning podcast, wherever you get your podcasts, about how market mentality is fundamentally immoral. And the way the market works affects people's psychology deeply, and something that they would never think is okay to do in a market context with money on the line, particularly when there are other market actors, right? So like, you're an airline and you're a human being running an airline. And you might think, well, having a Gestapo run the country and violently try to deport, millions of people, that might be a bad idea. But then that government comes to you and says, will you help us? We need this contract. A business owner like that might think to themselves, oh boy, that's rough. But number one, we need the money. And number two, if we don't do it, someone else would. So if we say no, it's not going to stop it. We're just going to lose out. And so they rationalize to themselves, well, that's a good enough reason. We'll go ahead and do it because we're not being evil. Maybe the government's being evil, or maybe the market's being evil, but I don't have control over those things. I only have control over my own business. I have like employees who I care about personally, and I need to be able to pay their wages. And so I'm going to take that contract. And all of a sudden, a reasonably good person who might have personal morals takes part in a deeply immoral system, all the while feeling like their hands are clean. So this article says, quote, businesses are society's most important non-state institutions, and most of the biggest ones in America are collaborating with Trump, making themselves a very steady pillar of support for his rule, end quote. And like I said, the article goes on to tell the story of how the pressure campaign succeeded in forcing the private company to cancel their contract. and explains like why that airline was sort of like uniquely positioned to be a good target. So like just some highlights. Protests were held in cities where the airline flew to. So they were being confronted everywhere they went. And even some cities that they didn't fly to but were considering flying to, they were targeting the airport administration saying, don't let this airline come to this airport. We don't want them here as long as they're working with ICE. And so that restricted this small airline's ability to expand in a way they were probably hoping to. Subsidies the company was receiving. Again, well, I mean, all companies receive subsidies like this, particularly big ones, but a small company that really needed the subsidies, which traditionally get framed as like providing economic opportunity for the corporation, the activists recast as citizen investment in state violence.
Nice.
Which is not wrong.
Nope.
That is exactly what subsidies are. That is the citizenry paying taxes and funneling that tax money into businesses. And what those businesses do should reflect on the people who pay that tax. And collectively, all these strategies came together. And it says, quote, the tactics varied, but were based on a consistent theory. Deportation infrastructure is not sustained by ideology alone. It is sustained by contracts, zoning decisions, labor, reputational cover, and silence. Those can be undone. So, I mean, these are pillars upon pillars, right? I mean, those are many pillars in the business pillar holding up a fascist regime. And so if you are chipping away at one piece of a mini pillar inside a bigger, like that is still incredibly valuable. Like this campaign, this article describes it as the Mosquito strategy. I mean, Erin, you mentioned, you go to a protest and you feel like, well, I'm not seeing the concrete results. I mean, imagine trying to take down, a full-grown person and you're a mosquito. You're not going to do it on your own. Of course you're not. But what the article says is many tiny bites until it was too painful to continue. Some city bites were quite painful, forcing Avelo to leave the West Coast entirely or to reevaluate its own hometown brand. Others were less successful, but still part of the overall effect. This was a victory, and it should be named as one, end quote. Like every single mosquito bite is part of the collective victory. And so if you feel like, well, the part I'm playing is so small and the impact we're having is so small, never forget that this is a collective effort because that's the only way it can possibly work.
Absolutely. And the other thing to remember is that while we often complain about our hyper-capitalist dystopian situation that we're in, recognizing that companies are responsive to people is important right now. And since, we're dealing with an administration who claims to be extremely business friendly and everyone wants to cozy up to them, remind them that they still need customers. Remind them of that over and over and over again. They are nothing without customers and people who use their company and give them money. And so you can take our capitalist hellscape and use it to your advantage to go and hit them where it hurts, because they are not going to do it on their own. They, as Jay said, they're warped. Their brain has been warped by capitalism. And the idea that, if we don't do it, someone else will do it. All of that kind of thinking is just baked into our society right now. So remind them, they are nothing without us.
I think in having conversations like person to person, I've been struggling with what is the right level of guilt to like utilize to get someone to take action. Because I do know, one, it feels hard until you do it. I think, for example, I haven't shopped in Target since 2024 or something. And at the time when I stopped shopping at Target, it felt like it was going to be cumbersome to do that because there were a lot of things that we just got at Target. We were able to go in one trip and be done. We didn't have to go to multiple stores.
Right.
And yet, 2026, here I am. Turns out, one, I spend less money because I don't pick up things I don't need. And two, I worked in the things that I got in Target at other shops that I was already going to. Like we get our toilet paper and stuff now from the grocery store instead of Target. And it's not a perfect system. Like, you can definitely call me out. I'm sure I've shopped somewhere that I shouldn't be shopping. As soon as you know, though, it becomes harder to avoid. And I think that's like the invitation to people. Like, when you notice that they're using some companies that we're trying to boycott, or there's an active boycott against that company, drawing their attention to it. And I'm trying, instead of being forceful and like being like, come on, Amazon, really? We're doing that?
Oh, yeah, we'll get to that.
To instead like being gentle. I understand that it feels inconvenient. This is something that is easy. It also feels like maybe this is one mosquito bite and you're not sure that it really matters if you shop at Amazon or not. But the point is that if all of us don't, it will matter.
Yes.
And so I think doing that gentleness, reminding them of the cause, and also bringing their attention, because some people aren't paying attention at the level that you are. And that's what I have to remind myself about my family. Like, I'll get upset at them because I'm like, y'all, the information's out there. The information's out there for me. I'm seeing it. I'm coming into contact. If the reels that my mom sends on Instagram is any reflection of her algorithm, she's not seeing this shit. She's seeing animals. She's seeing fun things. She's not torturing herself with all of the political things that consume my feed. So again, trying to be compassionate, but calling people in, because this is something that we all need to be calling one another in, holding each other accountable, and also giving the solutions. If not here, this is the option for you. This is what I did.
And do it together.
Yeah.
We've all heard the saying, something worth doing is worth doing well, right? Have you guys heard something worth doing is worth doing terribly? Have you guys heard that before?
No.
Like,
No.
But it sounds silly, but the reframe is actually, it's pretty solid, because if something is worth doing, it's worth doing at least something a little bit. You don't have to do it 100%. You know, don't buy your toilet paper at Target, buy it somewhere else. Such a small thing, but compounded over time with other people becomes a big thing. You don't have to do everything perfectly. And if you can get your mom, who isn't seeing all those things, to just do one thing, that's one more person doing one thing in the right direction. We don't all have to start becoming immediately vegan, recycling everything, avoiding all plastics, never shopping at any of the big shops. We don't all have to do all of it at once. But if everybody starts doing a little something, and you can get one person who's doing nothing to start doing something, that's all a step in the right direction. Now you got 2 mosquitoes. Now you got 3 mosquitoes. You're starting to get a swarm when you start doing little bitty things at once all together. And again, no one's expected to do all of it. I think in this country, probably more than most, we suffer from main character syndrome, where we think we're going to be the one that solves the problem, or we're going to be the hero.
Oh, yeah.
But that's not how anything works. Like, our war movies tell us that there's some brave soldier that did some smart thing. My grandpa was a cook in the army in World War II. That is a very important job. If you think about what the military actually is, especially why, our military is really good at a lot of things, it's because they're good at logistics. They're good at moving around stuff. People have to shit, shower, and shave. People have to eat. How many people are actually carrying a gun and firing? It's a small percentage of actually what the military does. Most of what the military does is logistics. It's just moving things from point A to point B. And that's what we need to start thinking of. We're not going to be, as a group, all out in the street fighting ICE, hands and carrying guns or whatever. That's a whole nother conversation. But that's not what we're trying to do. We're trying to do the little things that don't get written about, that don't get talked about. You'll never get credit for it. If that's what you're expecting out of this, stop that immediately. That's not what this is about. This is about just doing what you can because it's the right thing, and it will make everything better for everyone.
Whatever mosquito bite you are personally able to inflict, definitely see yourself as part of the collective, right? A swarm of mosquitoes makes people run away, undoubtedly. I've been that person. So within this article about Avelo, they just highlight super briefly that also Spotify recently stopped airing ICE recruitment ads, which they were being criticized for it. The fact that they stopped, again, feels like something small. Spotify not running ads, okay, great. That also kind of feels like a mosquito bite, but ultimately recognizing that corporations, just like people, see safety in numbers. So every single victory against an individual corporation sends signals to all of the others that they will not be safe if they choose to collaborate with ICE. And so again, there's this outward ripple of impacts that we may never see, but may be very real in terms of corporations not working with ICE, whereas maybe they otherwise would have. And so the article says, quote, "From Avelo to Amazon, all corporations must weigh their options: democracy or authoritarianism, community or violence. If you are profiting from a partnership with ICE, then you are in opposition to democracy and will face an organized coalition of working people determined to win a future free from the exploitation of the deportation machine." And then it concludes saying, quote, "More than anything, this campaign proves the fragility of the system. ICE and the security forces of this current government are not invulnerable. This win proves what happens when we refuse inevitability and fight together. That lesson is dangerous to any system that survives on our silence and our resignation to the idea that we can't change anything, because we can and did, and there's more to come." End quote.
Yeah. It's incredible that Spotify stopped running those ads. I actually was pretty shocked by that, because they didn't cave to pressure a few years ago when creators were jumping ship. But this effort and campaign as well, I mean, we can't not take into account the horrific executions that happened. I mean, that made it maybe more so that they would do this, but they wouldn't have just done it without the pressure. Absolutely not.
Next up from The Nation, want to stop ICE, go after its corporate collaborators. And they list successes we've already had. They mention Avelo Airlines and says, and the Minneapolis Hilton, as well as earlier pressure campaigns like the Tesla takedown, the fight to force Disney to rehire Jimmy Kimmel, and the boycott of Target over its Trump-friendly anti-DEI moves show the immense leverage that consumers and workers have when provided an opportunity, end quote. And I wanted to read that list because things like Jimmy Kimmel getting rehired felt like the right thing, but also pretty inconsequential. But when seen as one piece of this constellation of corporate activism, every single one of them, regardless of the details, is making the Trump administration toxic, and particularly ICE toxic. So every corporation should be terrified to be on the side of the Trump administration, and particularly terrified to be working with ICE. Every single one of these, even from things like arguing with Disney about Jimmy Kimmel having a late night show. In the big scheme of things, that doesn't matter. But in the scheme of making the Trump regime toxic, it's actually really high profile and really impactful. So understanding it through that lens is really important.
And it sends a message so that if someone wanted to do this again, they know what the outcome would be and make them a little more nervous to do that kind of thing.
Exactly.
I guess this is the one upside of late stage capitalism, where every company thinks they have to make more money every single year. That
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. This is our power.
Any kind of loss is potentially catastrophic for the company. If they have sustained losses over time, that could be the end of the company now. That's the level of power that they've given us, because they want everything. Well, if we stop giving it to them.
Yeah. Stock price dips, they get nervous.
Yeah. So this article goes on to some details. So how pressure starts. It can be consumer campaigns. It could be petition gathering, simply social media call outs, but it can escalate to boycotts. But workers inside the companies, it points out, have even more leverage, that because they can circulate internal petitions, they can call on their CEOs directly to cut ties with ICE and organize collective actions like sick outs. That's a good one. The article goes on to talk about tactics. It says, quote, "Tactics can include rallies in front of targeted stores, leafleting customers about a company's ICE contract or collaboration, and nonviolent civil disobedience that makes clear that business as usual won't stand. Other creative ideas include setting up anonymous tip lines for employees to whistleblow on non-public ICE collaborations, pressuring job sites like Monster.com and Indeed to stop featuring ICE job listings, asking local small businesses to post immigrants welcome here placards, and writing online reviews calling out companies' collaboration with ICE, end quote. So again, I mean, we said at the top, we're going to dump a pile of options on you because it really goes deep and wide, all of the ways that it is possible to get involved, even if from your own home.
I'm trying to remember the exact timeline, but Facebook made a layoff announcement the fall of the election, right? They were going to cut jobs. And then, of course, we realized that Zuckerberg was going to give money to the inauguration campaign and be at the inauguration and all of that. And I remember thinking these two things were separate at the time. But now I'm wondering if they were connected and they had this looming threat of layoffs as a deterrent for anybody to start an internal movement to say, we don't want this from our CEO. We don't want this kind of collaboration with the administration. And I know there was some internal pushback. Of course, for some reason, that company is incredibly tight-lipped and not a lot gets out. But there was some anger and frustration over cutting of DEI programs and certain programs to, hire more women and things like that. And it probably could have had a bigger impact if they had a more organized structure to begin with. If Facebook workers had a union, or if Facebook workers already had some mechanism within the company to unify and express their discontent. And so consider that too as a factor. If your company and you work at a company that is, doing business with the government, maybe you should make sure that there are already structures in place, because if they suddenly announce, hey, we're contracting with ICE or any other horrible entity within this administration, then you have an existing platform to work from instead of having to create something new from scratch.
And continuing with sort of more nuts and bolts, this article goes on to explain about the different corporations that need to be targeted. And they fall into basically three categories: low lift national targets, high lift national targets, and local targets. And so the difference is, it says low lift national targets are mostly public facing companies with relatively small ICE contracts that are set to expire soon, making them particularly vulnerable to consumer and employee pressure. And so that's companies like Dell, UPS, FedEx, Motorola, Comcast, AT&T, LexisNexis, Home Depot, and Lowe's. Whereas high lift national targets have deeper relationships with ICE and will be harder to pressure, but two in particular need to be tackled. It says Amazon with their Amazon Web Services, and Palantir, which knows they're evil and is sort of happy about it. So they're probably not going to budge from public pressure, but it's an example of a high lift national target. And then it says about local targets, again, there are so many options. There is something for you to do no matter where you are. It says, quote, local targets can be found in communities across the country where hundreds of smaller businesses have ICE contracts. Local activists can research and target these businesses, from contractors providing services to ICE offices to suppliers selling equipment, creating distributed pressure campaigns in every region where ICE operates. Hotels that rent rooms to ICE agents are particularly vulnerable targets, as the Minneapolis example demonstrated, and hospitality unions can play a key role in these campaigns, end quote. So we're including an article that is so detailed that we're not going to try to explain it. But again, we encourage you to check out the show notes, where if you want information, like how do I find which corporations are working with ICE, there is an article with an exhaustive explanation of exactly how to do that. And that will be linked in our show notes. And if you're not the one who's going to be compiling that list, again, there are organizations and groups that you can plug into and join an existing campaign.
I just wanted to quickly talk about Amazon, because I'm still kind of stunned that there hasn't been more of a major organized pressure campaign on them. And I do understand that is the high lift. I get it. I couldn't help myself. I was curious, how much of an impact would it really have if you canceled Prime en masse and stopped shopping at Amazon, because they have their hands in so many things, including AWS. And so as of 2024, AWS revenue only accounted for 16.1% of Amazon's total revenue, yet it was responsible for a whopping 74% of the company's operating income. And that's a lot. But 26% of their operating income is still from online sales. And so that's still quite a large percentage, and we have control over that. And so Jeff would like to not lose 26% or even half of 26%. And so there are ways to tackle big companies even when they feel impossible to chip away at.
There's an episode coming out soon on Best of the Left, wherever you get your podcasts, that isn't about necessarily boycotting companies, but because of the atrocities that ICE has and continues to rain down on communities, it just circulates into conversations naturally. So one of the things that I thought was interesting is a conversation that had tidbits about all of the ways that Amazon has its hands in so many things. So one of them was a publisher, and none of her books are going to be available on Amazon. So again, what's the overall consequence of that one publisher? A little mosquito bite. But there's also conversations about what servers they provide, because that's another part of their business. And I think what I'm learning from it is you just don't know how they're making their money. There are things that you can research and find out, but that aren't readily available, because often when people refer to Amazon, they're mostly thinking of the marketplace. So it's worth researching just so that you know how it intersects with like your company or your community, and how else you can boycott if possible.
If one publisher is making a stand, that's what can start a movement, right? Then maybe they make the call on other publishers to join them in this, and then they make the call on readers to push the publishers to do this. So it starts the ball rolling, and every person or entity that takes a stand needs to also call out others in their industry and those who can make an impact on the businesses within that industry to join the fight and to take a stand, and shame them if they don't, because at this point, they really should be aware of what's going on.
I doubt the average American knows what Palantir is. I don't know if it's because it doesn't provide any services to people that aren't trying to murder people. So I doubt anybody knows. But the fact that in this article, they are linked with Amazon, like those are the two high leverage companies. Everybody knows what Amazon is. And if you still have any doubts, if you're still using Amazon, like it's just like the company that named itself after the evil thing. That's what Amazon is. Amazon is a bad company. It's not just amoral, it's just immoral. So do with that information what you will, but that's an individual decision that people still haven't made yet. Stop using Amazon.
Yeah. And we should have been doing this a long time ago.
Right.
I've been banging that drum for quite a while.
And I can't remember, so correct me if it's in one of these articles, but I think about Palantir, it's one of the other strategies that we've discussed, which is, yeah, you might not come into direct service with them, but I'm sure they contract or get product or work with other companies that we may be able to pressure. That way, Palantir eventually feels that campaign, even though we're not directly, giving them money from our consumer pockets, at least.
And so to continue to expand our perspective on this, targeting the wealthy isn't just about Americans and American corporations, which brings us to this article, Tariffs for Oligarchs. Top economist urges Europe to fight Trump by punishing U.S. billionaires. And this call to action isn't exactly about ICE, it's about Greenland, but it's really all the same thing. So it says, quote, the leading French economist Gabriel Zucman is urging European governments to inflict financial pain on American billionaires in response to U.S. President Donald Trump's effort to seize control of Greenland, a mineral-rich island that some of Trump's rich campaign donors see as a potentially massive profit opportunity. Europe should respond to Trump's blackmail with targeted measures aimed not at American consumers, but at American billionaires, Zucman wrote in a post on his Substack. Access to the European market by billionaires and the companies they own should be made conditional on paying a wealth tax, in effect, a tariff for oligarchs. If Elon Musk, for example, wants to keep selling Teslas in Europe, he should have to pay it. If he refuses, Tesla would lose access to the European market. And the rationale for this, it goes on, says, quote, by targeting oligarchic wealth rather than national pride, Europe can blunt Trump's ability to mobilize nationalist resentment and rally part of the American public behind his imperial agenda, which I think is very astute analysis of American politics. And it goes on saying, quote, if imperialism is driven by oligarchic power, then oligarchic power must be confronted. What are the alternatives? Doing nothing invites endless blackmail, end quote. And that is just the same thing we've been saying about American corporations and trying to toxify ICE, targeting the money, which is the real source of power in the country, is absolutely the right point of leverage to aim for in all of these cases.
I mean, the inauguration showed us who is cozying up to the government. There's pictures of the whole crew. And this idea that they could try to distance themselves now or something, because I think some of them kind of have, it's all empty because they have already put themselves firmly in the pocket of the administration. They have already acquiesced and they have already complied. And so now they need to pay the consequences for that compliance.
And if we know one thing about Trump, he likes his little billionaire buddies. So
That's right. He does like his billionaire buddies.
I don't know. This was one I was excited about because I think hearing about boycotts and participating in them has been, I mean, not for everyone necessarily, but I know for us, a conversation that we've had throughout the year. It's intensified, obviously, but it's been consistent since we saw who was cozying up. I think I like the idea of outside pressure because then, again, it's that multi-pronged approach where it's not just reliant on those who are kind of trapped in the systems that, we've built in the US, but, those relationships, especially on the international level. Like these billionaires profit not just in the US. I mean, they're profiting all over. They have relationships all over. That's how they've accumulated so much wealth. And I also think that sometimes we feel disconnected. So if we saw those approaches, if we saw that, we're pressuring from the inside, they're pressuring from the international angle.
Yeah. And it's actually one of the pillars that we started with. International legitimacy is one of the pillars. And Trump, in record time, has absolutely demolished his personal legitimacy and with it, the United States. But I mean, people know what the deal is. They know that it's him. And so understanding how to target Trump is different than understanding how to deal with the United States generally. And so these specific suggestions, the next one actually is from a US economist, Dean Baker. He made the case for a similarly aggressive European response to Trump's economic warfare, saying, quote, European countries can announce that they will no longer honor US-owned patents and copyrights. Putting US patents and copyrights on the line is a guaranteed attention grabber. The vast fortunes of the sleaze buckets who put, that's a technical economic term, I think. The vast fortunes of the sleaze buckets who put Trump into the White House and back his attack on democracy in the United States and around the world will suddenly be thrown into question, end quote. I don't know if anyone would ever have the backbone to do that, but those kinds of ideas are great. If we've learned anything from Donald Trump, the threat of doing something drastic is often as effective as having to actually do it. And so throwing those kinds of ideas around and putting the fear of God into billionaires and making them think, oh, maybe Trump isn't the only government I need to figure out how to cozy up to is a pretty good idea.
I mean, we're seeing it right now. It's happening. A few days before we recorded this, the EU just made a huge trade deal with India. Mark Carney gave a speech in Davos that basically said the United States is the enemy. Like, he didn't say those words, but that was the implication. And he got a standing ovation for it. There are countries who realize that we're not a good faith actor, never have been. That was also implicit in, actually almost explicit in Mark Carney's statement that, these countries have benefited off of the neoliberal order by turning the other cheek, looking the other way when the powerful people take advantage, or the powerful countries take advantage, and just benefiting from it. If a country like Canada that is run by, he's just a centrist. Mark Carney is a banker. Like, he's, he was a better option than Polyev, who was running as a basically French Canadian Trump, but this new permission structure is out there. So these ideas that are being floated don't sound outlandish anymore. They sound like options. If you attack American oligarchs, you're doing what we've done to Russian oligarchs, and you're kind of treating us, our country, like the enemy that it is showing itself to be. And I think other countries have realized that for a while, but now it's too hard to ignore. So these are things that could really happen. And that's the stuff that hopefully could make change. It does require that multiple countries do it at the same time. Nobody wants to be the one out there on an island who isn't.
Yeah. I mean, Mark Carney was calling the middle-sized countries together. Yeah.
And if that happens, that's like Jay keeps hammering, that's just one of the pillars that can fall.
And look, he's weak. Like, I think we forget this because he has power, but he is weak. He is fragile. There's a reason there's a term taco. Trump always chickens out, because he will back down pretty easily when he realizes that people aren't going to play his game. And so that's basically what happened with Europe. I was really worried they were going to just kind of acquiesce and figure, well, to avoid something worse, we have to give him what he wants. But look, people have been saying it for years. The only way to deal with a bully is to say no, and he'll have a little fit and he'll get over it. Like, he'll move on to his next thing. And that is where we are. And I think before we got on YouTube, we had a conversation after the election about what could happen next. And I had this realization that, oh, we're going to be Russia. I get it now. Like, we're going to be the Soviet Union during the Cold War. Like, that's what's going to happen. The world is going to move on without us. You know, it's not good to see it happen, but it's been kind of interesting to watch it happen, and so quickly. And I have shame for being a citizen of a country that is causing so much international damage and disruption. And yet there is only one response. There was only one response. And so we have to use the pressure points that are available. Everyone has to do that. Trump cannot, Putin cannot get away with pretending that they control the entire world. The end result of that would be horrific.
Next pillar of support is political legitimacy, and I think we are approaching this one gently. Don't set your expectations for Republicans too high, but, you know, any progress is some progress. So in the category of unexpected allies, Mother Jones writes, some conservatives veer off party line after DHS agents kill another U.S. citizen. And it says, quote, some on the right have questioned the narrative coming out of the Trump administration and have urged that a thorough investigation take place, even while often still praising the president and immigration officials and criticizing Minnesota's leaders, end quote. So, like, definitely a mixed bag. These people are not heroes, but it's still important. It's still relevant. And this is the type of thing that was not happening before. And like was mentioned with Spotify, you know, would the pressure campaign have been enough to get them to take action, or did things on the ground have to get horrific enough for them to take action? Obviously, the answer is both, and the same goes for these Republicans. But Senator Thom Tillis said, quote, any administration official who rushes to judgment and tries to shut down an investigation before it begins are doing an incredible disservice to the nation and to President Trump's legacy. And it's absurd framing, but like, they're the Politburo, right? Like, we're in the Soviet Union. Yeah. These people are party actors. They're apparatchiks. They have to like follow the party line while making their opinions known. Like, you kind of just have to read between the lines. Senator Bill Cassidy said, the events in Minneapolis are incredibly disturbing. The credibility of ICE and DHS are at stake. There must be a full joint federal and state investigation. We can trust the American people with the truth. And then Marjorie Taylor Greene basically laid out the full story of the death of Alex Pretti, but then asked people to imagine, what if it was Biden's officers against a MAGA supporter, and just asked, what would our reaction have been? Which is pretty good framing, because you would have flipped your fucking shit is the obvious answer.
Yeah.
And then just more on the list, Governor Kevin Stitt of Oklahoma, Eric Erickson, conservative broadcaster, Tim Pool, right-wing commentator, Maria Bartiromo from Fox News. Like all these people said things that were like, I don't know, I'm usually into propaganda, but this seems like a stretch too far. And so like, we're mostly talking to a left-wing audience. And so to clarify, you don't welcome strange bedfellows like this into an uncomfortable alliance because you expect them to agree with you on much. But in the fight against fascism, literally anyone who opposes fascism is now your ally. So sorry, that's the case.
Yeah.
Additionally, having conservatives even tepidly opposing Trump's tactics are still far more effective messaging for conservatives in the country than the most full-throated opposition from the left due to the whole trusted messenger effect, because people are conditioned to almost entirely dismiss their opponent's arguments out of hand, hardly even listening to what they have to say, while when people who they generally agree with, they will actually hear them out. So for conservatives, that's Republican politicians, conservative commentators, Fox News personalities, religious figures, military vets, business owners, former conservatives who have now changed. Like all these people can reach people in the country that progressives simply can't. And so if these people are going to start questioning, like cracks in the dam, chipping away at the pillar hasn't broken, the pillar hasn't collapsed, but every chip is important.
And in keeping our expectations low, because I completely agree, just because there's a consensus on one thing doesn't mean that you're going to get people who completely disavow their entire conservative, ideology. But I was thinking of this, back when we were talking about the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Part of the discussion about Putin and how it gets de-escalated was providing an off-ramp. And I think the weird thing about this horrific incident, to me, was it the 5 angles that you could absolutely see everything that happened in that interaction? Yes. But for others, it's the Second Amendment. And that is a weird thing for me to have to wrestle with, of this is going to be the stand that it has to do with the Second Amendment. But I think for some, this is their offering.
Yeah.
This is when they can say, like, oh, whoa, I can still stick to my conservative values and say this is wrong because it competes against those. And there's an audience for it. Again, I don't think that we're going to have every senator or every member of Congress, take this stance. But if enough can to, go alongside Democrats, you will see pushback on funding. We can make those little chips. It's going to be a lot of pressure. But again, I do think that this is a potential for an off-ramp for at least some conservatives.
Keep the expectations super low with these people. Tim Pool has since said that he doesn't lick boots. He is the boot. He voted for this. He's happy about it. So don't expect any of them to actually change. But,
No.
to go back, Rand Paul has since gone on CNN and said, basically, you saw what you saw. This is ridiculous that they're lying about it. So there's value like in this, expecting some of them to finally somehow, some way pull back a little bit. It can happen, but it's just as likely that they dig deeper in.
Yeah. And I would also say you don't have to be best friends with anyone who this was their line. You don't. Yeah, you don't have to be friends with anyone who this unbelievable escalation was finally their line. You don't. But you do have to make sure they feel somewhat okay with joining together with all the other voices in saying this is wrong, right? And so that's a delicate thing to do. But if there's someone in your life who is expressing this, don't just shut them down about it. Recognize that this is an opportunity. And then just speaking about Fox News real quick, because even Peter Doocy was questioning Kristi Noem about this whole situation and how we are being told to not believe what we saw with our own eyes. And it's not that Peter Doocy became a good journalist all of a sudden, because, every now and then these Fox personalities will ask the right question or a good question. That doesn't mean that they're waking up or that they're, having some revelation. the fact is, like, they all love this administration. They love what they're doing. But Fox News seems to be the only entity that actually cares about Trump and his perception and legacy. Like, they care about the polling. They care about what is happening on the ground. The administration doesn't, to their detriment, actually. Like, they do not understand what is happening. Fox News does. And so when the administration slips up and they have on the stupidest people in the administration, they try to make them look stupid because they want them gone. They'd like Trump to get rid of Kristi Noem because she's hurting the whole cause. So they have ulterior motives. It's not all pure. But at least they recognize that this is a line that was crossed that will not fly, that propaganda can't just plaster over. And so for that, I guess we can be grateful because, yes, they can reach people that other people on the left cannot.
Speaking of keeping your expectations low, that brings us to the New Republic article. Here's your damn playbook, Democrats. And I really just want to read this one piece. This is about the low expectations, and then we'll move on. It starts by, sort of laying out how deeply unpopular what the Trump administration is doing is, and then says, quote, "A normal opposition would be chugging coffee and suiting up for battle right now. We've got them on the ropes. Let's go on the offense," is the appropriate response to our current political dynamics. Instead, inexplicably, the leaders of the Democratic Party are still refusing to give up the fearful crouch they adopted immediately after the 2024 election. It goes on, "No rational functioning opposition party would step in to fund the primary enforcement mechanism of the authoritarian takeover they ostensibly oppose. Failing to whip the Democratic caucus to oppose this legislation, as Hakeem Jeffries has already done in the House, and Chuck folds every time Schumer has shown every indication of doing in the Senate, where Republicans will need Democratic support to reach the 60 votes necessary to pass their Gestapo funding bill, would be both a moral catastrophe and political malpractice," end quote. And quick note on the fecklessness of the Democrats. I would be happy to have the Democratic Party collapse and disappear and be replaced with something else. But to be clear, unless there were a fundamental change to our entire electoral system, what would replace the Democrats would be another single party that would serve essentially the same constituency as the Democrats do now. So the only difference would be maybe like the leadership of the party or some internal structures of the party, things that need changing, so great, but it wouldn't turn us into a parliamentary multi-party system with proportional representation so that the socialists could get seats in Congress or anything like that. That is not what would happen if the Democrats simply went away, which is not going to happen tomorrow anyway. So, given those realities, and given that the Democrats are the only opposition party, we have thoughts about what they should do and what people should encourage them to do. But that's not because we're like fans of the Democrats and we think they're going to come and save us. I just feel like we have to say that sort of thing in advance of the inevitable criticism of Democrats, which we agree with. That's my whole point.
Yeah.
So moving on to a different New Republic article, this could be the moment MAGA collapses. We get to, okay, so if the Democrats are the opposition we're stuck with, what do we do and what should they do? And it says, quote, "Trump is politically vulnerable right now, but what happens next depends in part on the opposition. If Democrats and the left want to turn this moment into a real inflection point, permanently cratering Trump's popularity and MAGA's power, they need to go all in on this fight. The people of Minneapolis and others all across our country have already been throwing down in incredibly inspiring ways. It's time for our opposition party to join them." And the writer imagines, saying, quote, "What if we close our eyes and imagined for a moment how a maximally effective opposition party might respond to these events? When I try this exercise, here's what I see. When the government shuts down, congressional Democrats announce that they are heading to Minneapolis. Trump's regime has launched an all-out attack on an American city, an attack that will be repeated against more of our communities if it's not stopped there," they say in a press release or conference. Democrats are committed to protecting Americans from these assaults on our rights and our persons. So we are getting on a plane and going to where those assaults are strongest. Whenever possible, they ask local reporters from their states or districts to join them on their trip to communicate about the reality on the ground. Some Democratic content creation teams might be a good idea too. When they arrive, Democratic leaders join in the frontline organizing happening in Minneapolis. They don't just stay for a quick photo op and then bail. They do ride-alongs with commuters, the activists following Border Patrol vehicles around the city. They join the legal observers recording clashes between Minneapolis residents and the militia forces occupying their city. They put on gas masks when ICE fires tear gas at them. They stand with parents protecting their schools, end quote. And so the article goes on to point out that there would be multiple benefits to this, and sort of obvious, feels intuitive and obvious to me, but they lay it out. Number one, endless media coverage bringing attention to Trump's fascism. If you want to drive his popularity down, make people pay attention to this as much as possible. And if elected politicians were among those getting tear gassed, that would make the news. Number two, there would almost inevitably be a political win. Even if it's just the pressure mounts too much and the siege of Minneapolis ends, there would be concrete benefits to this. And then the third, the article concludes saying, quote, it would give Democrats an opportunity to show the American people that they do, in fact, have some backbone after all. This is one of the Democratic Party's key liabilities right now. It lacks credibility. A recent poll found that fewer than 1 in 5 Americans believe the Democratic Party is the party that can get things done. People don't believe Democrats will do what they say they'll do. They don't trust them to follow through, to stand up to power, to commit to fights. It's hard to think of a better solution to this problem than a days or weeks long explosion of content featuring Democratic leaders acting with what, to most non-MAGA voters, would be seen as undeniable courage in opposition to undeniable tyranny, end quote. Seems unlikely, but I like that. I like that daydream. And the article sort of concludes, there's nothing really stopping this from happening. And so the point I'm driving towards is the way the Democratic Party works is fear. It's fear-based. And so they fear taking action. And since they are all we have on the political level, they're not all we have in totality, because as we're making very clear today, we have each other, and there's a huge range of things that can be done outside of the political structure. But politics is one of the pillars. And if Democrats go along with funding ICE, they are complicit in allowing fascism to continue.
Totally.
And so the job of everyone in the country who opposes fascism is to give Democrats the encouragement they need to be more fearful of not taking action. They're going to act out of fear. That is their nature. Right now, they're too afraid to act. They need to be too afraid to not act.
Yeah. By the time this episode comes out, I'm not sure what will have happened, but as of this moment, some of the Democrats who were on the fence, which is insane, have said they will not vote for this increase in funding. But it took another person being murdered. Another person. I cannot even wrap my head around that. But when you describe this, dream, I think of AOC going to strikes and being there in the crowd. And she's not pulling focus. She is there to help amplify. She's there to give support, use her platform for the good of the people who are on strike. That's how you do it. The fact that nobody has really picked up that style is still unbelievably shocking to me. And these aren't the leaders we need, but they're who we have. So we have to just force them to be better. It's such a low bar.
These aren't the leaders we need. They're the leaders we have. But I do think it's the leaders we've earned. I think what we have seen here over the last couple years, decade or whatever, is that a lot of the problems we have is that we as a populace have become disengaged. And the solution to all these problems that we keep talking about is us doing something. And in the context of politics, all we've decided to do collectively is vote occasionally, not all of us vote, and then completely stop paying attention.
And then go to brunch.
Yeah.
Or just not vote and say that you're above it. And, like they're not going to do anything anyway. This is what we talked about, right before Biden stepped down. What the Democratic Party really needs is more democracy. And more democracy involves more involvement. We need to be more involved. We need to hold these people more accountable. We need to be as engaged as we possibly can, because in a democracy, representative democracy doesn't mean the representative just does everything. It means they represent you. And if they don't hear from you, they don't care what you say, then they're not going to represent you. This democracy is not a representative democracy. This democracy is representative of money, because that's what these people actually fear. That's what their fear of this Democratic Party is about, because they're beholden to many of the same funders that the Republican Party is. I'd say on a personal level, they're probably better people, probably, but that doesn't matter. We need action, but we need to make them act, and we need to put forward better people going forward. Like, this is another one of those things. Like Jay said, the Democratic Party isn't going to do this tomorrow. These people are who they are. But there are some people in the Democratic Party now who do get it, and there could be more of them, and we could help facilitate that.
Yeah. They're fearing their constituents, supposedly, these moderates, but they should be fearing the primary candidate that is going to come. That should be their fear.
So I kind of want to address just the funding a little bit, because there's been a lot of conversation specifically in Atlanta. So I know with everybody watching Minnesota, the fear was that other cities were going to be targeted, right? Well, in Atlanta, a new satellite office has opened a little south of the city. We've already have an office where Homeland Security and ICE operate out of, but now this is an additional one. So everybody is saying it in the ways of like, oh, we're the next Minneapolis. Like, no, that's not what's happening. All the new ICE vehicles that are popping up, this additional satellite office, it has to do with the money that's being infused, because now there's so many employees that they need a different office that they can also report to. It's very vague. They're not saying how many agents are going to be, reporting from here, what kind of increase we're looking at, but this has nothing to do with a federal mandate and everything to do with the money that's just being dumped into this. So the vehicles, it's not because, oh, we're the next Minneapolis. It's because part of the spending bill had to do with them getting their own personal vehicles. So the newly fresh SUVs that I've seen multiple times pictured has to do with that money, period. So on that, with Senator John Ossoff, he's up for re-election. And while he's not on the side of Homeland Security, ICE, and things like this, the fact that he's not out talking about this, that people are scared, the satellite office opening, there's now been more protests, there's more demonstrations planned, and I don't see his office coordinating at all. I'm not saying it couldn't be happening, but they're not publicizing it in that way, that like he's going to be out there with the people, hand in hand, pushing back against, this expansion. So I do think it's important because, there's not a heavy primary challenger. I'm not saying there's no one, but there's not a heavy one that's being talked about. So it feels like we're stuck with him like in the general election. And if we're not pushing him now while he's up for re-election, what is it going to look like then once he's settled back in Washington? So I think now is a really good opportunity for those senators, for those Congress people who are up, to put pressure, apply pressure, and expect them to be out there with you. Because what's the excuse? Like, you have power. You're representing people who don't. So use that power. I think there's a lot of professional like decorum that gets overemphasized. So that like ability, that drive to disrupt, it's not quite there.
I was just going to advocate for more activists running for office, because that's the kind of temperament you need to buck a system like that does grind you down. And yeah, not everyone's going to maintain their energy, but that's the kind of people we need in office at this moment.
Yeah. And I'll just end on this, that disruption comes in multiple forms. It could come in the form of an activist politician who really does a good job, but it also comes in the form of having truly, truly evil opponents. And so just as with examples like corporations turning against ICE, Spotify gets a tiniest possible shout out of deciding to not take ICE money for ads, or the small airline succumbing to pressure, like the Trump administration and ICE being as full-blown evil as anyone feared they would be is finally doing something to wake people up who would not normally wake up. And so thanks for that, I guess, right? So,
Jesus.
So to put it starkly, this article concludes saying, quote, "The Trump administration is waging a campaign of terror against its own population. They are attacking children, abusing elders, and treating an entire city of Americans like enemy combatants. They're trampling on the First, Second, and Fourth Amendments to the Constitution at the very least, and now they're literally murdering civilians in the street. It's all too horrifying to fully comprehend, but there is one source of light in the darkness. The regime has miscalculated. They seem to have assumed that the American people are as deprived of humanity as they are, but they're not. Americans are repulsed by what's happening in Minneapolis, and they're putting the blame where it belongs. This could be Donald Trump's Waterloo. Let's press the attack." End quote. That is the only response. That is the only reasonable response to what we are currently living through. And I feel like progressives are slowly being shaken out of, decades of disappointment at how, like, no matter what we do, we cannot get people to wake up to the urgency of what we are saying. And finally, it's happening. People are waking up to the urgency of what we are saying. Conservatives are, like, many of them, aghast. Conservatives are now sounding like progressives, calling the Trump administration Hitler-esque and Nazi-esque. Like, it is sinking in. I mean, particularly, we mentioned the, Second Amendment angle, right? Like, conservatives are being given off-ramps from their ideology where they are seeing two different values they hold put in conflict with one another. And that's giving them the opportunity to say, okay, turns out I really don't like this. And we need to welcome every single one of them to the fight. And as soon as we're done with fascism, then we'll go back to fighting with those people. And that's okay. That's what democracy is supposed to look like. What we are living through now is absolutely not. Did we solve it?
Good enough. There's a lot of action items here, and I hope people will get something from this and go forth.
Yeah. Again, don't be overwhelmed by all the action items. Just think of it as a buffet. Check them out and see what calls to you. As mentioned before, all of the articles we've talked about, but a couple in addition. There's a Truth Out article. Here's how to find out which corporations are collaborating with ICE, and a law firm for immigrants.com posted, basically a full play-by-play strategy for campaigning against corporate collaborators. And so for the activists watching and listening, those resources are there for you in the show notes.
I think we solved it.
All right. Well, if you have thoughts you want to add to the conversation, send an email to j@bestofleft.com, or for the privacy focused among you, reach us on Signal at bestofleft.01. Thanks for listening. And remember that unbelievably, this is all really happening. So continue to be decent, act like what you do and say matters, and do what matters most.
The "this is all happening" closer gets wilder every time you say it.
Yeah.
I know.
It really does.
The
first time you said it, I was like, oh man, that's something. And now we're a few in. I was like, whoa, it is. You're right.
It's fucking happening. It's real.